So, Julio. It's not a complicated topic, but there's some layers to it, although it's mostly positive. So let's start with the positive. He has had what's been, despite an injury, a very good second half.
A good second half. So since the start of July, he's been a 149 WRC plus. He's been about what Julio Rodriguez has been in his career, minus a little bit of power. But otherwise, offensive production-wise across the board, that's been him. I want to start going back to that Edgar quote and how it ties back to Julio Rodriguez. This quote where he says, I don't care how hard you hit the ball, but if you have the wrong swing, you're going to hit for low average. And most importantly, the production is not going to be that great. Like, that sounds like Julio Rodriguez, what he's referencing there. Almost certainly. You could say that with a lot of players on this team, but if there's any one that represents that quote more than anyone else, it is Julio Rodriguez. You know what the funny thing is? So Edgar's been the hitting coach now, 2 weeks, give or take? 2 weeks and change?
I think 2.5, yeah.
Yeah. So the month of September has essentially been about half of Edgar's tenure. So it's only half of the sample size that Julio has had with Edgar Martinez. But did you know Julio's only striking out 12% of the time this month?
Very, very small sample of games, but yeah, that's a good sign. If you want to look to August too, or basically in this whole stretch he's had, he's striking out less since July 4th. You did since the start of July. I did his numbers since July 4th, since our friend Jason Churchill put out this tweet a couple days ago. So I updated it where he's at a 160 WRC plus, but he's striking out 22% of the time since then. That is way down from where it was once upon a time.
He had a couple of months where he was striking out a ton. Like, he struck out a lot in the small sample of July. He struck out a lot, and he struck out the most in the first month of the season, which was about 33%. But the drop down, like 23% for Julio, is low. But the number that sticks out in the month of September is, like, that is jarringly low for what Julio Rodriguez has done as a big leaguer. Like, that's just not really who he is. Like, we expect him to be, if at best, in the low 20s, and yet he's at 12%. And then what else did Edgar say in there? I don't care how hard you hit the ball if you have a bad swing. Well, notice what Julio Rodriguez is doing in the month of September. He's actually hitting the ball softer than he usually does in the month of September. He's not hitting it as hard. It's almost like he's trying to make more contact, and it is making him a more effective. Let me reel that back. More effective is the wrong word for his career sense, but more effective this season is correct.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been more effective by just not selling out, not striking out as much.
Which is great. This has been the best stretch that he's had all season. It's not really close. Obviously, this is a bit of an elongated stretch that we're looking at now because it's about 2 months' time. But it does seem like some of these changes he's made with Edgar are making a difference. Look at what he does in August, right? 713 OPS, 113 WRC plus, which we can get to the bigger picture here in a minute about Julio. That shouldn't be the standards he's held to. He's not paid all the money he's paid to put up a 113 WRC plus every month. No, he's supposed to be an anchor. Numbers like that are not an anchor. But when you look at where he's been a lot of this season compared to a full month in August, or close to it, I guess, once he got back from the injury, it's better. It's a step forward. And the fact that he's not striking out as much, like, there is progress here.
So let me use 2 month examples here that I didn't have up before, but I have right here. So average exit velocity, most people are familiar with. Over 90 is usually good. Below 90 is usually where you get into the more light-hitting players in baseball. So Julio Rodriguez had an average exit velocity of over 91 miles an hour and a hard hit rate of over 45% in both April and May. So, Lau, if you hear those numbers, you would assume, pretty productive hitter. He's hitting the ball hard consistently. But Julio wasn't productive in those months. It didn't work for him. The last 2 months, Julio Rodriguez has a hard hit rate under 43% and an average exit velocity under 90, and has seen those better results. So that's a little context to what I said. Not hitting the ball as consistently hard, but he is finding more production relative to what he has done this season. Ultimately, this is not the best version of Julio Rodriguez, because the best version of Julio Rodriguez needs to use the talent he has, which is hit the ball harder than 98% of players in Major League Baseball. Because not everyone can swing a bat and swing it as fast as Julio does. So you got to be able to utilize that. But if we're guessing what Edgar has brought to Julio is like helping simplify things down, sure. But I remember you guys talked about this quite a bit on Brock and Salk, and Salk brought this number up a few times where he's mentioned how Julio's swinging more than Javi Baez is. So you have the combination of him swinging out of his shoes and just swinging too much. Well, he's brought the swing rate down too last couple of months. So like there's these things where he's being more selective. Seems like he's not selling out as much on the results of hitting the ball as hard as he humanly possibly can, because he doesn't need to do that.
No, he's got natural power and natural hard hit ability regardless of what he does. Yeah, he doesn't have to swing out of his shoes. Where do we even go from here? I mean, we've outlined some of the problems that have caused him to have a tough year at the plate already. The fact he hasn't done as much damage on fastballs, the fact that off-speed pitches have killed him this year, especially breaking balls. I don't know how much we've talked about this. His platoon splits are a little odd this year. He has not been a guy that's struggled with one side of the plate in most of his career. In fact, you look at his career platoon splits against righties, his career OPS is 783. Against lefties, it's 827. Right? Against lefties, it's 827. Righties, it's 783. Mm-hmm. This year, he is significantly hitting better against lefties than he is against righties. And I don't know if that has to do with some of the fastballs in that he gets, but this hasn't been some drastic issue until this year. Fastballs in, breaking balls away. That's how you get Julio out. Right. And that's what a righty can do. So that makes sense. Yeah, but and it's also a problem because he's going to see righties 80% of the time. But it's not like lefties can't pin him inside. But against lefties, no, but their breaking balls don't go outside; they go inside. Right. I'm just saying he has an 805 OPS against lefties this year and a 657 OPS against righties, where that's way off from his career norm against righties. It's not quite the Mitch Garver level of not being able to hit a right-on-right breaking ball, but Julio's not been good against sliders and sweepers this year. Mm-mm. So no. that matches up, and combine that with just being able to throw him a fastball in off the plate and he'll chase it most of the time. He's going to get himself out. Yeah. Hasn't been good against changeups, hasn't been good against curveballs. It's just like basically all off-speed pitches and breaking balls have ate him alive this year. Yeah, and then we come back to the point where he's now still has, even after an 11-game hit streak, his OPS, I believe, is still under 700. Mm-hmm. So there has been improvements, and I think Edgar's helping Julio, and clearly the stretch he's been on over the last 2 months has been really good. Again, you just said it, since the start of July, he's 50% above league average as a hitter. Smaller sample because he missed a lot of time, but he has been better. I think how he does the rest of the year is going to be pretty telling. It's going to make a big difference, too. And he doesn't need to keep striking out only 12% of the time. Just want to see the combination of production and power. He's just not been able to match the two together this year. The right. Power outage has been one of the most telling things of Julio's season. It's not that he doesn't hit the ball hard. It's that he's just not hitting it hard consistently, and he's not hitting it in the air. That is his big issue. And we can go back to the conversation we had with Gary Hill on June or July, when we had him on earlier in the season, where he's essentially outlining of Julio's offensive profile. It's pretty much just the ability that he has to pull the ball in the air. It's just disappeared this year. And a lot of that has been when Edgar talks about the game being too mechanical, Julio's sitting up there thinking a little bit too much and not being able to get around on pitches and pull them in the air. And if Julio's able to pull 6 more pitches in the air this year, how much different does his offensive production look? Drastically different. Sure. A few more home runs, OPS would be higher, WRC plus would be higher, different narrative. And different conversation we'd be sitting here having right now. So speaking of this conversation, all this encompassing, obviously most of it's positive, but I still do want to ask this question. Does it matter? Like, is Julio doing this really a big sign, or could it be a big difference maker in this season? This is where I'm starting to get caught up, but I want to get your take on this.
No. Literally. If he spends the final 3 weeks of the season on scorched earth, we can revisit this conversation. But this current stretch he's on, no.
Oh, so we're in the same boat then.
Remember what happened last year with his stretch? When he started his August stretch, he was right about where he's been this season, where he was essentially a league average hitter up until August of last year. Maybe slightly above, but still not great. But then he has his August, and all of a sudden you look at his numbers, it's like, wow, it looks exactly like 22. Because the month was that good. But he hasn't had that month to prop up his stats this year. And streaky hitters can use hot months to prop up a season. That's fine. Like, there are people in the Hall of Fame because of that. But that hasn't been the case this year. And this just hasn't been quite hot enough to say season saved. The only way Julio saves his season in a statistical perspective is if he goes nuclear the final 3 weeks of the season and the Mariners make the playoffs. That's it. Otherwise, it will be a failure.
Oh, so we're totally in the same boat here. Yeah, because this is what I was going to say. Even when he was going off in August last year, there was correlation to it. Because what happened when Julio went off in August? The Mariners got into first place in the AL West. They were in a playoff spot. They surged in August. Then in September, they kind of faltered down the stretch. What's happened here is even though Julio started to get hot, which has been sandwiched by an injury that he's had to recover from, the team doesn't look all that more inspiring offensively. Okay, yes, by the numbers, they are fourth in the league in WRC plus over the last 2 weeks. That's great. But let's reiterate. They just won their first 3-game road series that wasn't against the White Sox or A's in 4 months when they beat the Cardinals in 2 of 3 this weekend. And while they're 3 games back in the final wildcard spot and they're creeping closer to Houston, they're at 4.5 now, it still feels like a pretty big uphill climb. And unless they really get really hot here in the final 3 weeks, I still have a hard time believing we're going to be looking up at the end of the season and see this team in a playoff spot. And like you said, that's the whole difference. If Julio gets so hot here in September that he essentially saves the season and wills this team into the playoffs with his bat, yeah, that's a very, very different story. But if he continues to, put together some good games here and put together some good games there, and he ups his season OPS a little bit, he gets it slightly over 700, whatever, and they still miss the playoffs because it was too little too late, the rest of the offense still wasn't hitting enough, he didn't do enough himself, yeah, it doesn't move the needle that much for me.
But also, you can't blame Julio for the Mariners having bullpen struggles. You can't blame Julio for some of the other lineup struggles and some of the roster shuffling. That's not his fault.
No.
While Julio Rodriguez is, and I will say this, is the number one reason the Mariners have failed this season, that doesn't mean while he's heated up since the beginning of July and the Mariners still hasn't won, it's not because he's playing, for example, like a selfish brand of baseball that doesn't make a team around him better. That's not the case. He's doing that in spite of other players around him not performing. Yeah,
but also Logan Gilbert leads baseball in WHIP, and the Mariners got shut out in one of his best starts of the year on Saturday, and Logan Gilbert, while pitcher wins and losses are the dumbest stat in all sports, Logan Gilbert's like 7-11. So,
do you think Logan's called Felix and asked him about that 2010 season yet?
I hope Felix would pick up his call. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Logan's in Florida in the offseason. They should just visit each other.
Maybe they have.
Yeah, maybe they have, and we just don't know. Yeah, this is the point about Julio. Yeah, that's not what we're saying. I hope that didn't come across that way. Nobody's saying he's playing selfish baseball or anything like that. But ultimately, what this comes down to is, especially if the Mariners don't make the playoffs, at the end of the day, Julio Rodriguez still has an OPS below 700. He has barely been a league average hitter this year. He's finally started to get the WRC plus up over 100 in the last couple of weeks. So what all this says is if he wants to be called a superstar, him having a hot few weeks at the end of the year, now isn't changing what my view on him is. Because my view on him is, and it sounds like you're in the same boat, is he has still had more bad months than good months in the last 2 seasons that he's played. And if he wants to be called a superstar, I'm not even talking the Judge Ohtani range because they're so far and away at the top right now. If you want to be in the next tier, if you want to be with the Gunners and the Gunnar Hendersons and the Bobby Witts and throw whoever else you want to throw into that mix.
Well, I think Bobby is ascended above that. But anyway, that's besides the point. I get what you're getting at.
But Bobby's going to have a 10-win season. That's what we all thought Julio could do this year.
Yeah, and doesn't a 10-win season put you with Judge and Soto?
All right, fine. I said Judge and Ohtani. Fine. You can put Bobby and Soto
anyway,
up
but
in that
like
category
that's
too.
nitpicking. I get I get what you're saying. He is going to need to have a full season of superstar play.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing we said in June. Was it July 1st? Yeah, July 1st.
Yeah.
Same thing. Same argument. That does not change. Full season. A hot stretch would be great. He would be lauded for it. But that would not change our revised expectations for Julio going into 2025. Right. Like, that doesn't change. Like, you and I could do Julio's 2025 preview right now if we wanted to. Because we know what we're going to say. It's going to be the same thing when we talk about it in February.
Right. He has had more bad months in the last 2 years than he has had good months. And if he wants to be called a superstar in 25, again, if you want to be with okay, fine, it doesn't have to be Bobby Witt and those guys. But again, Gunnar and Devers and whoever else you want to put into that bucket. Austin Riley when he's on top of his game. And
Corey Seager.
Right. Like that group. Mookie's probably in the Judge Ohtani range too, so he's ahead. But yeah, like that's that second group of superstars. Not quite the elite of elites, but still like guys that are in the MVP race every year. If you want to be called a superstar, you've got to do it start to finish. Not saying you can't have a bad 2 weeks because everybody goes through cold stretches in a season, but for the most part, over the course of 162, you have to keep the consistent offensive play up. And over the last 2 years, that hasn't been the case.
And unfortunately, the other top prospect who came up with Julio at the same exact time is Bobby Witt Jr. And look what he's doing. He might be worth 11 wins this year.
Yeah.
Like you look at that and you see, man, you just see the duality of what baseball can do to a player. One player in his third season going through the biggest struggle he's had as a professional, and the other one peaking and playing at the 100th percentile of what he can do.
And the guy that finished second to Julio in Rookie of the Year voting that year is the best catcher in baseball.
Yeah.
Adley.
Yep.
So this is where he's at. It's just reality.
And maybe Edgar with his batting average and RBIs is the guy to unlock that.
Maybe. And again, if Julio actually goes scorched earth in the final 3 weeks, Mariners get into the playoffs, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I don't think a single person around this time last year, exactly a year ago, would have said, oh, the Diamondbacks are going to the World Series. But if Julio finds some way to just get the Mariners into the dance, and then he continues it into the postseason, and the starting pitching carries them, maybe we have a different conversation in the offseason. Maybe. But for right now, it's not going to happen. This is who he is at this point. It's great that he's getting hot, but the narrative on him is not going to change until he does it over a full year.
No, it will not. And the only difference is I don't think the Mariners are making the field with 84 wins like the Diamondbacks did.
Right.
Probably it would be nice. I would feel a lot better about their chances if 84 was getting you in.
Right. Also, speaking of bulletin board material from this podcast, maybe Julio is using us as bulletin board material too. Not just the team, but him. Churchill put out the stats since July 4th. This is what he's done. Or you said since July, this is what he's done. AKA the exact point in time we did our Is Julio a Superstar conversation, paired with Julio and Jared Kelenic have been the exact same offensive player over the last year and a half.
And what happened to Kelenic since then?
Oh, yeah, he's really been struggling, unfortunately.
Yeah, notice how we haven't talked about Jared Kelenic since July 1st?
It's unfortunate. I still root for the guy to be great.
I know. You know what's funny? One of my favorite baseball YouTubers, Foolish Baseball, who hopefully one day we can get on this podcast, did you see the tweet he put out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Braves are the National League Mariners. I got a chuckle because maybe Jared Kelenic just brings it with him wherever he goes.